Okay, we're on page 43. Rabbi Gamliel used to say, whoever has not, literally in the Hebrew, said these three things on Pesach, or concerning Pesach, has not fulfilled his obligation. And what he's going to give is explanations of the three mitzvos of eating that you have on the night of the Seder, the Paschal sacrifice, which we don't have, matzah, which we do have, which is a full-fledged Torah obligation, and moror, which is only rabbinic, because the moror is really attached to the Paschal sacrifice. If you don't have the sacrifice, then the moror is only rabbinic. But matzah is both attached to the Paschal sacrifice and is also a separate mitzvah. There's a separate verse that says, "Ba'erev tochlu matzos." So that mitzvah we still have. And the paragraphs will explain the meaning of each one of these items that we eat. And as I said yesterday, when he says you haven't satisfied your obligation, it doesn't mean that you've done nothing and you really ought to do it over again. That's not true. It's just not true. If someone skipped these three paragraphs of the Haggadah and ate all three items, he would have done all three mitzvos. And indeed, it's not obviously clear what obligation Rabbi Gamliel is talking about. Some say that he hasn't fulfilled his obligation of telling the story of the Exodus. And again, it doesn't mean he hasn't fulfilled it and he has to go back and do it again. It means he hasn't done it in the best possible way. Which would mean what we have said now at least 6 times, and we'll say over again, and other applications. The mitzvah of the night is to relive the Exodus, to re-experience the Exodus. Now, if you go through the Haggadah and tell the whole story of the Exodus, and you say, wow, we're doing this for 2 hours, what's on the menu? Oh, terrific menu. Meat, freshly slaughtered and cooked meat. And, you'll have to put up some bitter herbs and crackers. And he says, bring it on. I'm hungry. And he eats it. He has fulfilled the mitzvah of telling the story, and he's fulfilled the mitzvahs of eating the three things. Question is, which one didn't he do excellently? Which one didn't he do in the most perfect fashion? So if the purpose of telling the story is to relive the events, when they ate the Paschal sacrifice in Egypt, they knew what they were eating. And when they ate the bitter herbs, they knew what they were eating. When they ate the matzah, they knew what they were eating. And if we're going to do that in the best possible way, we should know what we're eating also, not just time for the meal, I'm hungry. The other way of saying it has the same message, but it's even a little deeper. You haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of eating the matzah. Because eating the mitzvah of eating the matzah is to experience the meaning of the matzah. Okay, you ate it, and you don't have to go back and do it again, but the impact of the mitzvah was to experience what the meaning of the matzah is, and you left that out. So in either case, you haven't done what you're responsible to do in the best possible way. Now let's look at what these paragraphs say about these three items. Pesach. Why did our fathers eat a Paschal Passover offering, during the period when the temple still stood? Because, blessed be He. Now, here's how they translate it here, but I already questioned this translation and I explained to you differently. Your translator here writes, passed over the houses of our fathers in Egypt, as it is written. You shall say, it is a Passover offering for Hashem, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and spared our houses. And the people bowed down and prostrated themselves. Now, that verse could be read the way the translator translates it here. But I told you there's another verse. And the other verse says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will posech on the houses and not allow the destroyer to come in. That doesn't give you the picture of HaKadosh Baruch Hu killing the Egyptian firstborn and then just skipping us and not doing it to us. There, the picture is there's a destroyer in the streets, and without special protection, the destroyer will come into Jewish houses also and kill Jewish people also. HaKadosh Baruch Hu stands in the doorway of the house and says, not here. And posech doesn't mean to pass over. It means to jump from house to house, landing on each house, kiviyachol. And since that verse is also a verse written in the Torah, says the Ramban, that's what really happened. And this verse is just ambiguous. It says, when I was there, you didn't die. But you didn't die because I stopped the destroyer from coming in, who is also a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's an angel. At any rate, we have a sacrifice that we eat because they ate a sacrifice. And their sacrifice was integral in the fact that their houses were saved. Now, the Torah tells us that when they offered that, when they performed that sacrifice, they took the blood and they put it on the doorposts and the lintel of the doorway of their houses. That's all the verse says. But the oral tradition tells us they put it on the inside, not on the outside. And then the verse says, when Kodesh Baruch Hu says, when I go out in Egypt at night to kill the firstborn of the Egyptians, v'ro'isi es adam, I will see the blood and I will protect your houses. So the naive reader says, oh, well, look, God has to have a sign on the door. This is a Jewish house. Otherwise what? He doesn't know? But the blood's on the inside. So he's not seeing it on the doorway and knowing not to go in. What he sees is the fact that the Jew in the house performed the sacrifice. That's what he sees. It's not the fact that the blood is on the door. And indeed, the commentators say, when you offer a sacrifice, you do so in the presence of an altar. And one of the things you do is you put the blood on the altar in various ways for different sacrifices. Where's the altar here? The Torah didn't tell us to make an altar and to cook it on an altar. No. So some commentators say the house is the altar. You make your house into an altar to present yourself and everything you are before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why you put the blood on the house. So that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees. He sees that as a Jew living here who's dedicated everything that he is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why he protects that house from the destroyer. Okay, matzah. This is a simple paragraph which is really quite tricky. Why is there this matzah? Because the dough of our fathers did not have time to become leavened before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and redeemed them. It didn't have time. That means there was a dough. They had dough. And there wasn't time for it to become leavened. Meaning what? That they were planning for it to be leavened. That was the plan. It's just that things happened so fast that it couldn't happen. As it says, they baked the dough which they had brought out of Egypt into unleavened bread, for it had not fermented, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provision for the way. Wow. So let's figure out. This is a very complex sentence. They baked the dough when? When is this baking of the dough taking place? Well, it says, which they had brought out of Egypt. So where are they now? They're not in Egypt anymore. That happened already. They brought it with them when they left Egypt. Where are they now? So this is the night of the 16th. It's after the Exodus. They come to the first resting place after a day's trek. And that dough which they brought with them, they baked into matzos. So now you say, let's figure this out. They took that dough with them and they baked it into matzos. Matzos have to be unleavened. They can't have any fermentation. This dough they made 24 hours before, 19 hours before. They carried it with them the whole time, and it stayed unfermented. Okay, so from here, the Gemara derives that dough, when it is constantly being worked, constantly being manipulated, constantly being moved, doesn't ferment. You have it on a sack or in the back of your, and you're walking through the desert and you're banging it on the back, so it doesn't ferment. Okay, but then why did they have a dough in Egypt? What were they doing with a dough? And it says, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay. That's why. They meant that it should be angel's challah, bourbon's challah. They were trying to make challah before they left. They just got caught short. That's what it says at the beginning. The dough of our fathers did not have time to become leavened, because the King of Kings revealed himself to them, and they were chased out of Egypt too fast. So again, their plan was to make challahs. Now you think, what are you talking about? You're going to make challahs on Pesach? What's that? You can't do that. It's not according to the rules. And the answer is that the rules for the Pesach in Egypt are not the same as the rules for subsequent years. They didn't have a 7-day prohibition against eating chametz, only a 1-day prohibition. I'm quoting the Ran now. And not only that, there was no prohibition against possessing chametz. That's only later on. So their thought was, okay, tonight we're going to eat the Paschal sacrifice, the matzahs, the wort, and we're going to set out on a trek, but what are we going to eat tomorrow night? Let's provide for the way. So we'll bake some challahs now, we'll wrap it in saran wrap, we'll put it in a plastic bag, and we'll carry it, that's a little joke, right? And we'll carry it with us till tomorrow night, and tomorrow night we'll have food. But they didn't have time. They didn't have time. So they couldn't bake it in Egypt. They were chased out too quickly. And then, by the time they got to the first resting stop, after walking all day, they're going to wait then for it to become a challah. It takes 2 hours to bake challah. So they made matzahs out of it there also. Which means that on the night of the 16th, what they could have eaten bread, they ate matzah. That's something to pay attention to take into account. Okay? That's what the verse is talking about. The question is, how is this an answer to the question? The question is, why are we eating matzah at the Seder on the night of the 15th? And it's very difficult to say we're eating matzah on the night of the 15th because on the night of the 16th, when they left Egypt, they ate matzahs which they didn't have to eat because the dough didn't rise. How is that an answer to the question why we're eating matzah at the Seder? So I asked this of many people, and one of my sons-in-law answered me. He said, all the matzah is, and I found it in other sources later, maybe he took it from there, all the matzah is a sign of haste. That everything had to be done quickly, just as matzah is made quickly. Just as matzah takes no time, when you'll go to bake matzah, you may have heard of the 18-minute rule. The 18-minute rule has nothing to do with how long it takes to bake matzah. As you will see there, the average time for matzah is 9 minutes, 10 minutes. From the time the water hits the flour to the time it comes out of the oven is 9 or 10 minutes. The 18-minute rule is a rule for the oven. Maybe there'll be some spare dough that doesn't get baked, left alone with no attention for 18 minutes is the amount of time for which we consider that it has leavened enough to become forbidden. So the 18-minute rule is the 18-minute rule in the oven. Don't use the oven for more than 18 minutes before you thoroughly clean it out. And you'll see that in that 18 minutes, there'll be 5 doughs that go in, or 8 doughs that go in. They go in very quickly, they come out very quickly. So the idea here is only the idea of reenacting the idea of haste. And I think I told you that there are Yemenites who have the custom to sit there at the Seder with your coat on and with a sack on your back, taking your possessions, and with a walking stick in hand. And when they finish the Seder, they get up and go. Where they go, I don't know, but they get up and go. Now, the idea is they're reliving the experience of that night in Egypt, which was preparation for leaving Egypt. So that's the connection. Yeah.
It's just like since it took them quite a while to prepare the korban, while they were cooking or preparing the korban, they had a lot of time also to get ready the meal. Like it's just the full symbolic.
Yes, they did. Yeah, I think you're right, but you have to pay attention to what the verse says. They had time. It's not as if they didn't have time to do it if they knew where they were leaving at 12:35. But they thought they were leaving at 3 in the morning or 5 in the morning. They had thought they had more time, and they were pushed out faster than they thought they had. So it's not as if there wasn't time. If they had known they were going to be pushed out, they could have done it earlier. They could have. They should know that. Yeah.
The question you mentioned, like they baked matzah because they did not have time. However, they still had like a bread that was applicable. They still have the mass that was applicable for baking challah beforehand. That they just carried it with them. But like all of them made matzah. Like not one of them did like this Yemenis like how it's called like soft bread. Because I cannot just believe that they settled that this is the best way to make bread because it's barely eatable. Matzah. It's barely eatable, it tastes less. It's like children cannot swallow it. Like it's like kind of seems unreasonable the choice for starving people to make that their dish, even sacrificing like 1 or 2 minutes. Like they could have made it softer, at least.
Did you ever taste Sephardi matzah? Sephardi. You're talking about Ashkenazim now. Ashkenazim make crackers.
Yeah.
Sephardi don't make crackers. Sephardi make flexible bread, which is matzah. It's let's get the terminology straight. Matzah means water and flour and no leavening.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it has to be a cracker. Crunchy,
So why
solid.
make it a cracker?
Okay, but let's just be careful, right? The word matzah means water, flour, and no leavening.
Yeah.
The Sephardim today happen to make a flexible bread. They make a flexible bread,
Which makes sense.
like a pita,
Yeah.
right? Only it's very tough to eat. Because the pita is good and the other things are good because there's more ingredients than just water and flour. And if it's just water and flour, it's hard to eat. It's hard to eat. I tried it once. Maybe there are other styles that I don't know about, but I tried it once and it was quite hard to eat. Now, as a matter of fact, a lot of people like matzah. I happen to love matzah. And I eat as much of it as I can on Pesach, and I eat it with several meals a day. And so I don't think it's hard for everybody to eat. And kids love it, and they ask for more. And so, at least the way it's made today, it's not a difficult thing to eat. Of course, if you could, and if you're an Ashkenazi and you're not practicing the way Hasidim do, you can put it in your soup. You can put it in your soup and soften it. So it doesn't have to be hard. You can eat it with jam, right? Just Ashkenazim. As Hasidim have a special chumrah that they don't do that. So I don't think that's correct to say that it's a difficult thing to eat and it's hard and it's painful. So it's not correct. You'll be with a family for Pesach. You'll see how they eat it and ask for more. They take it.
I was just wondering about cracker form. It's like seems,
I'm talking about the cracker form now.
yeah, it's like
I'm telling you, you're not right. You're not right. If the kids fight over it, it can't be hard to eat. It can't be.
it's like we know that they have cheese, but like some people don't even have cheese. Like 2-year-old.
Okay, come on. The 2-year-olds don't have to eat matzah. Okay, that's matzah. Moror, bitter herbs. Why do we eat the bitter herb? Because the Egyptians embittered the lives of our fathers in Egypt. As I said, they embittered their lives with hard labor. mortar, bricks, and with all manner of labor in the field, whatever service they made to perform with hard labor. We explained all this when we talked about the Haggadah. By the way, in the 4 questions, I didn't say this, but I think you should be aware of it. When it says that Halayla Zeh Ano Achlim Shai Rakos, on this night we eat various vegetables. Halayla Hazeh, on this night, why is this night different? So some people mistakenly put in the word, which they have from the matzah, kulo morar. It's all bitter herbs. That's dead wrong. You can eat any vegetables you want, just that you have to eat also bitter herbs, not just not only bitter herbs. So that I know some people, I think it's a mistake in the years that they have. Okay, now those of you who were here from the beginning will remember we started off with Avadim Hayinu Lepharaoh Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Hashem took us out of there. That's statement number 1. And statement number 2: if Hashem had not taken our ancestors out of there, then we and our children and children's children would have been slaves to Pharaoh. And I said, you see an open contradiction between those 2 statements. Who left Egypt? According to the first sentence, we left Egypt. According to the second sentence, our ancestors left Egypt, and we were never there. So who is it? And I answered then, well, when you say we, and you're talking about a nation, you could be talking about an earlier stage of the same nation, as I would pull down an overly proud student from Great Britain and remind him that we, the Americans, won the Revolutionary War against your redcoats. And if someone challenged my statement, we, what are you talking about, Rabbi Gottleib? You and who else overwhelmed the redcoats? It took place 250 years ago. So the answer is, by we I mean America, because I'm an American. So that you could answer over there. The we means the people, and then the second statement is talking about the individual human beings who are our ancestors. But now you'll see that reconciliation isn't good enough, because the next paragraph says, in every generation, it is one's duty to regard himself as though he personally had gone out of Egypt. This is what I told you about reliving it, that I have to undergo a personal exodus on the night of the Seder. And this is explicit in the Torah's verses. As it is written, you shall tell your son of that day, it was because of this that Hashem did for me when I went out of Egypt. You're telling your son these words. This isn't a plural we. We could refer to the nation. I can't refer to the nation. I refers to me personally. And then the paragraph says it word for word. It is not only our fathers whom the Holy and Blessed be He redeemed from slavery. We too were redeemed with them. And now it brings another verse. As it says, He brought us out from there so that He may take us to the land which He had promised to our children. That's a we, but it's in addition to the previous verse. So here, there's a virtual exodus that people go through. Now, I think this takes many forms. I'm going to mention 2 to you, but others will have other explanations, and you should ask them. I think this is a very rich idea. One is, some books are written in such a moving way, they're novels, but they're written in such a moving way that people cry when they read about them. If something sad happens, they cry. That's called vicarious experience. I know intellectually that it didn't really happen, but I invest myself in the story as if it really is happening. the 5 Tanoim who were sitting in Bnei Brak lost track of the time is because they were feeling the oppression of the Egyptians and feeling the challenge of the plagues and feeling the moment of slaughtering the paschal sacrifice, knowing that these are animals sacred to the Egyptians, and being concerned over the impression it's going to make. These people are really living through it. And it is possible to do that. That's one thing. And the other thing is that every one of us has times in life when the walls are closing in and we feel helpless and we feel that there's no way that we can control the situation. And through trusting in Kodesh Baruch Hu and through praying to Kodesh Baruch Hu and perhaps adding to the mitzvahs that we do, there appears a crack in the wall and we're able to escape. The word Mitzrayim, the name of Egypt, comes from the language Tsar, which means narrow, constricted. The oral tradition tells us there was a reputation that Egypt had that no slave ever escaped. You just don't get out of here. You don't make it out of here. So that's that sense of impossibility. It's an impossibility. There's no way out. The Chazon Ish says that one element in trusting Kodesh Baruch Hu is to realize that nothing's ever for sure. Whatever you think about the future, even 5 minutes from now, isn't for sure, because since the Kodesh Baruch Hu has unlimited power, he could change anything. The Gemara puts it this way: the enemy has his sword on a Jew's throat, and he's cutting. The first drops of blood are already dripping down the sword. Don't give up hope of being saved. Because to give up hope means to say, nothing can change it, even Kodesh Baruch Hu can't change it. And that's wrong, because he can. My image is, if you have a picture of the future, and you have all sorts of slots, the economy and my health, and the trip to Tveria, and so forth and so on, you should have at least one section with a question mark in it. Because you really don't know for sure what's going to happen. And this makes a big difference in your mental set. This even psychologists have talked about, and I mean the even. To a large extent, you see and register what you expect to see. And something unexpected shows up, you might not even perceive it. So, shall I do this? I enjoy this so much. I can't resist. What's written on the board? Oh, no. No. Read again carefully. No. It's written Paris in the spring, isn't it? Yeah, but you don't notice that, do you? Because you expect Paris in the spring, and you don't see the second the. Interesting, hey? And there was this film that I saw, which is really unbelievable. Some people are playing with a basketball, passing it back and forth to one another, and running behind one another. And there's a person in a gorilla suit who walks in front of the camera, in between the people, and waves, and walks out the other side, and you don't even see it. You don't even see it. Then when you run and play it again, when you know the guy's there, you say, oh, look at that, he's walking across the thing. But you don't see it, because you're preoccupied with the people with the basketball, and your mind doesn't pick it up, doesn't register it. So what you're what you're prepared for when you expect to be surprised, you'll pick up the surprise. Let me tell you something about ancient history from about 600 years ago. When people prepared manuscripts, there was a problem with the spelling. Maybe they made mistakes in spelling. There were people who were hired to go through and correct the spelling. They were called proofreaders. And they had to be trained to do that. Because when you see a word, you see the letters you expect to see. And you don't see the letters that are written. So you have to be specially trained to look at the letters. Today we have spell checkers. The only problem with them is that sometimes I've correctly spelled the wrong word. And they don't pick up that it's the wrong word. Okay, anyway, so here the idea is that we each have things in life where we think we see barriers, and sometimes we give up and say, well, that's just not for me, it's just impossible. And the word impossible should never be part of your vocabulary. Because impossible would mean to restrict the Kodesh Baruch Hu's power, and that's not appropriate to do. Yeah.
But like, how do we know, like, okay, we can say God can save us, but we can also say God won't save us. Just not because he cannot do, but because he won't do. He just won't.
You're right. And there can be circumstances like that. And there are times when the prophet says, for example, the destruction of the first temple, when there were false prophets saying, God will protect his house, God will protect his city, and the Babylonians can't possibly conquer us. And Jeremiah said, I'm sorry, it's over, and he's going to do it. He's going to allow them to conquer it because that's what he wants. And Jeremiah was the true prophet, and of course what he said was correct. So there are times when we do know he's not going to save us. That we do know. It depends on what we've been told. That certainly can happen. Okay, so now comes something which, maybe I have time to do this. Therefore, it is our duty to thank, praise, pay tribute, glorify, exalt, honor, bless, extol, and acclaim him who performed all these miracles for our fathers and for us. He brought us forth from slavery, etc., etc. Now, the question, what's the therefore? So I think what I told you, I'm going to say it a couple of more times before we get to the end of Mitzvah Hashem. Because we are reliving it, therefore we are required to say these praises. And that's what the previous paragraph said. The previous paragraph said we should relive it, right? That's where the therefore comes from. It's because you say the praises on the basis of your own personal experience. Not always and not only, but here that's what's going on. I'm going to explain this to you in some detail. Before I forget, if you go back to the previous page for just 1 second. There are 2 verses that are brought to say that we personally went out of Egypt. The first one is, it is because of this that Hashem did for me when I went out of Egypt. And the second one was, it was not only our fathers that the Holy One, blessed be He, redeemed from slavery. We too were redeemed with them, as it is written, He brought us from there so that He might take us to the land, etc. So Baal asks, why do we need 2 verses to establish the same thought? And he says the first verse is singular and the second verse is plural. And it means to tell you that there were 2 aspects to the Exodus, just as there are 2 aspects to Jewish life at all times and places, under all conditions. And that is, I am an individual person, individual Jew, with my responsibilities, my relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then there's the nation, of which I am part, and I play a role in the responsibilities and performance of the nation. And we have mentioned before that you don't have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu without being part of the Jewish nation. That's the platform on which you stand to reach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That we saw when we talked about the wise son and the wicked son and the 4 questions. So that's what it means. The Maral says there's a double exodus. There's for me as an individual person, and there's for me as part of the nation. That's why there are 2 verses. I think it's a very beautiful and important idea. Okay, let's get a little background to what we're talking about. When we stood at the sea, and the Egyptians were bearing down on us, Kodesh Baruch Hu opened the sea, and we crossed, and the Egyptians were killed. The Midrash tells us that the angels wanted to express praise for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said the famous idea, you want to say my praises. My creatures are drowning in the sea. And therefore you can't say my praises. So, wow. Because Baruch Hu calls the Egyptians, the evil Egyptians, my creatures. And when my creatures are drowning in the sea, you angels can't say praise. Fine. Now let's take into account a little more information. What about us, the Jewish people? Did we say praises? Oh, yes, we did. We said the Song of the Sea, and if you will check the text of the Song of the Sea, 90% of it is singing about, or speaking about, song there means poetry, about the death of the Egyptians. Not dedicated just to saving us. The vast majority of it is the complete destruction of the Egyptians. So now we'll have to understand what's the difference between the angels who could not say praise and we who can say praise. 1 second. You need more information. Don't jump to give an answer until you have all the information. Furthermore, in later generations, on the 7th day of Pesach, which is the anniversary of crossing the sea, we don't recite full Hallel, which is the psalms of praise that we say on joyous occasions. We don't recite the full Hallel. The full Hallel is a full-fledged mitzvah, a rabbinic mitzvah. And when you recite what's called Chatzi Hallel, that's just a custom. And many, including we, Boston Hasidim, and the Sephardi world in general, don't say a blessing on it. Don't say a blessing, we say the whole Hallel. Why not? Because the Egyptians died then. Oh, so when the Egyptians died, we also can't say praises in later generations. But at the sea we could say. So that needs to be explained. And to all of this, Rabbi Meiselman added the following question. And the idea that I'm going to say is really Rabbi Meiselman's idea. Right? What about the night of the Seder? What was going on the night of the Seder? Didn't all the Egyptian firstborn die? Isn't that my creatures are dying? After all, it isn't the whole Egyptian nation that drowned in the sea, it was only the soldiers. So we say Hallel twice at night, once in Shul and once at the Seder, and again in the morning. How can we do that if God's creatures are dying? So there's a lot that has to be explained here. So this is what Rabbi Meiselman said. Shira, which as I said means poetry, is a kind of expression which carries a certain element, and it is the attitudes that it expresses are two. There's praise and thanksgiving, both. Normally when we say Hallel, we're expressing both. Now, when God's creatures are dying, praise is not appropriate. That's what the Medrash says to the angels. You're telling my praises? It's not appropriate to do that when my creatures are drowning in the sea. But thanksgiving for someone who personally benefits from the event, that you can say. And that's the difference between us and the angels. Our lives were saved. So for us, it's double. It's thanksgiving and praise. For the angels, it's only praise. So Kodesh Baruch Hu says to them, you can't say praise because for you it's only praise. But for the Jews, it's praise and thanksgiving, therefore they can say. Well now, in future generations, the Jews then also weren't personally benefited. So for them too, it will only be praise. That's why we don't say it. Now, you'll ask, what about the night of the Seder? Well, the Jews who were in Egypt, whose lives were being saved, lives and freedom were being saved, they could say praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because they had thanksgiving in it as well. And now you'll ask, but what about later generations? Why don't later generations of Jews lose the ability to say the Hallel, the Shira, Just as we lost the ability to say Shira on the 7th of Pesach, when that's the anniversary of crossing the sea, so also on the first day of Pesach, when it's the anniversary of the Exodus, when the Egyptian firstborn were dying, why don't we lose the ability to say Shira then? And the answer is what we just said 15 minutes ago. Because we're reliving it now. We're experiencing it now. And that's why it says here, because we're experiencing it now, therefore we can say these praises. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to. I think that's an amazing explanation. Everything in the end fits, and it has. Now I will tell you, after my husband told me this, I noticed myself something very, very interesting. Hand me the Chumash, please. At the Song of the Sea, the very first verse says, Az Yashir Moshe. Moshe said Shira of Bnei Israel and the Jewish people also. Es Shira Hazos, this particular Shira to Hashem. And they said, O Shira, I shall say Shira to Hashem, etc. The word Shira is used 3 times in this verse. Now, if you look into the Targum Onkelos, the Onkelos Aramaic translation, you see something which I find fascinating. I've asked at least 50 people this question, and I haven't gotten an answer. Where it says, Oz Yashir, Moses and the Jewish people said Shir, it says, Bechein Shabach. Shabach means to praise. Moses and the Jewish people, Shabach. And then when it says, this Shira, it says, Tushbachta, this praise. But when it says, Ashir el Hashem, I shall say Shira to Hashem, it says, Nishabach v'nodi. We'll say praise and thanksgiving. Now, I think that's very remarkable. The same root 3 times in the same verse, and it's not translated the same way 3 times. Twice it's just Shevach, and once it's Shevach and thanksgiving. Praise and thanksgiving. There are commentaries of Onkelos. The Art Scroll has a sefer on Onkelos, and it notices this, but it doesn't explain it. It doesn't explain why it should be. It explains why you could put the 2 of them together, but it doesn't explain why in the same verse with the same word 3 times, and it says it twice only Shevach, only praise, and the 3rd time praise and thanksgiving. They don't answer that question. Other translations and other commentaries that I saw don't even mention it. So, people are watching this. If you have an answer, please send it to me. I've asked this of considerable scholars. I've gotten no answer. But the fact that at least once Onkelos translates Shira as praise and thanksgiving means that the 2 are involved in the concept. Just like Rabbi Eisenman said. I showed it to Rabbi Eisenman and he was appreciative. So I think that's a kind of backup for what he's saying. And that's the lefichach, one word. Therefore, we're responsible to say to praise the Kodesh Baruch Hu and to thank the Kodesh Baruch Hu. I'll tell you one more thing, and then I'm going to quit for today. And it says he took us out from suffering, etc., to good things. And therefore, at the end of this paragraph, we will recite a new song before him. Now, here the word song which I keep saying is poetry, in the Hebrew is shira. But if you skip 2 paragraphs and go to the blessing, this is on page 49, and it says at the very end, we shall then sing a new song of praise to you. And if you look in the Hebrew, it says, Shir Chadash. The first one is a feminine form, and this one's a masculine form. It's the same word, shir and shira. It's the same context, and both of them are rabbinic words. In between, you have verses from Psalms, from King David, but these are all both rabbinic words. Why in the one context would they write shira, feminine, and the other context write shir, masculine? And one explanation that I saw is this. In the first paragraph, we're talking about what we're going to do that night. We are going to say Shira, to praise the Kodesh Baruch Hu, for what has happened. And there it's feminine, because a woman says praise and thanksgiving to the Kodesh Baruch Hu after birth. But often, I would say the majority of times she does that, she knows that there is likely and hopefully another pregnancy and another birth. Another pregnancy means some pain and suffering for most women, and it means some danger. So this is a temporary reprieve. It's not the end of this process of danger and suffering, and exaltation and joy and all the rest, but those elements are there. But at the end, the last paragraph, where we have the blessing, is talking about the future, when the Kodesh Baruch Hu will rebuild the temple. And after that, it's over. Those periods of pain and suffering are over, and therefore it's masculine. A masculine shir would be something which you can think of as the end of that whole period of history, the end of that whole susceptibility to those events, and it would be a permanent salvation rather than only a temporary salvation. That could be one way to explain why one is feminine, one is masculine. And there may be other interpretations as well. And here again, I would say, if you ask this question at the Seder, you'll definitely get 5 points, because people often don't notice it, and it's a good thing to talk about. Question? You got a question, Mary? No? Okay. Fine. Okay, so let's say today's Wednesday, so I'll see you tomorrow. And tonight I'm here also. For those who are